Good morning and welcome to our panel discussion on recent notable geopolitical developments in the Middle East. Since October 7th, as you know, the region has undergone major shifts. Gaza is destroyed, Iran's influence is declining. There has been a regime change in Syria, and President Trump's second term is already bringing significant changes to U.S. foreign policy in the region. So to analyze these developments, we have an excellent panel with us today. We have Dr. Jean-Loup Samaan, who's joining us remotely from Singapore. He is a senior research fellow at the Middle East Institute and an expert on Gulf security and strategic affairs. Zaid M, hello, thank you for being here. You're a commentator on Gulf politics and a government communication strategist with extensive experience advising officials in the region, and Dr. Fatiha Dazi-Heni, who's a political scientist specializing in the monarchies of the Arabian Peninsula and a researcher at the Institute for Strategic Research of the Military Academy. Welcome to all of you. We'll start with our discussion here on stage right now, and then we'll take a question from the audience later on. As our guest, Fatiha, must leave at 12:10 due to professional commitments in Lille later this afternoon. We'll start with the dynamics and the reshaping of the Middle East since October 7th and the Gaza situation. As you know, the October 7th attacks and the subsequent war in Gaza have had a deep impact on the region. Israel's military operations have reshaped alliances, and the destruction of Gaza has intensified diplomatic challenges. So we'll ask the question now, how has the Middle East transformed since then, and what does the future hold for Gaza? We'll turn first to Dr. Samaan, who's joining us remotely. Militarily, Israel's war has had significant regional implications. Hello, Dr. Samaan, I hope you're here with us. Do we have Dr. Samaan on screen?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
So I'll turn to you first to have kind of a broader landscape of what's going on right now. As I said, militarily, Israel's war has had significant regional implications. Do you think that we have entered a new phase of warfare in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Margot, and to the organizers of the forum. It's a pleasure and an honor to be joining you for this panel. It's a challenging question, and I'm not sure that at the moment the Israeli government or the Israeli defense forces are actually thinking long term, not because they don't want, but because I'm pretty sure they are still in the ongoing war in Gaza. What I mean by that is that I don't think we've reached yet a moment where the chapter of the Gaza war is over. We have, fortunately, a ceasefire, which is more or less holding, but clearly both the Israeli government and the IDF leaders have said repeatedly that they're not going to stop the goal of getting rid of Hamas. So right now we see a lot of discussions with the Trump administration, but beyond that, I don't think there is a major change in terms of the priorities. Having said that, it's also related to the fact that the military strategy right now is still depending on the political strategy first and foremost, which is that Benjamin Netanyahu wants to keep his coalition in government, and that his far-right partners have been threatening that if there is more than what we've seen with the ceasefire, basically with the phase one of the ceasefire, if we move towards, let's say, a true reconstruction plan of Gaza, they will leave government and they will oppose that, and that means elections. So what I mean, again, is that at the end, we have more of a political strategy than a military strategy at the moment, and it is still more or less similar to what we were discussing a few months ago.
Thank you, Dr. Samaan. We see how political dynamics are reshifting military operations. As you said, Dr. Samaan, how Benjamin Netanyahu coalition is very important for him in the long run. Zaid Baghi, we know that Gulf nations initially condemned Hamas, but also criticized Israel's response in Gaza. How do you see Gulf diplomacy evolving in reaction to this conflict, especially that we know that we had Abraham Accords on the table with, for example, Saudi Arabia?
Thank you very much, Margot. That's a good question. First of all, I just, if you'd permit me, like to thank Major General Poitier and Admiral Durando and the Vice Chair of the Geopolitical Committee, Emmanuel, a very dear friend of mine, and Rashid, who made it possible for us to be here. The region is in a state of flux, and it's interesting because it's created an opening for unlikely players to be negotiators, to be peace building. I think there is now a grappling for both sides, Qatar and Saudi Arabia, to be in the middle of negotiations and peace building for separate reasons. For Saudi Arabia, I think it's about currying favor with the Trump administration. And for Qatar, it's become part of national policy, which is to act as a broker in the region, to use its great wealth, its location, to be a responsible partner for peace between different allies. I see that happening further, just as the Russians and the Ukrainians met in Riyadh. Sheikh Tamim of Qatar was in Iran. As in, there are things happening every week. The geopolitical chessboard, as it were, is not certain. It's moving all the time. And I see the role for Saudi Arabia and Qatar changing all the time in terms of negotiation and peace building, especially where, in the terms of Qatar, for example, it's become part of its raison d'être. That's what it wants to do in the region. And I think it's a very exciting part of policy.
Thank you, Zaid. I'll turn to you, Dr. Dazi-Heni. As we know, Arab states are pretty much divided on how to approach Gaza's reconstruction. They had to propose a plan to the US as well. They tried to put something on the table. What political conditions are they placing on aid?
Thank you, Margot, and thank you for the organizers to invite me to this workshop table. Firstly, I want to say that there is a general embarrassment felt by the Arab Gulf leaders with the global hostile perception of the societies of the Arabian Peninsula towards Israel, with the devastation of Gaza and the de facto re-annexing of the West Bank. So this is quite important to settle. And they have deployed a fairly active diplomacy, but this diplomacy proved to be incapable of exerting any influence on the course of the war during these 15 months. Even though Qatar played a very important role in mediating, etc., Saudi Arabia was not the main player we expected to have, even though they played a very active diplomatic role with an evolution of their narrative. Since the beginning, it was quite difficult for Saudi Arabia because they were trapped between the fact that they have initiated a rapprochement with Israel under the umbrella of US, of course. So they were keen to normalize. When I say they, the Crown Prince himself, because his father, King Salman, was not in this orientation, he always defended the fact, the Arab peace plan that has been adopted in 2002, with a Palestinian state in its borders of June 1967, with East Jerusalem as a capital. So at the head of the state of Saudi Arabia, you have a bicefal position on this issue. Of course, this has evaluated, and with the devastation of Gaza, because the pictures are vibrant, you know, and I often travel to Saudi Arabia, and I have seen that the youth, that is the main supportive public to the young Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, was extremely affected by this devastation of Gaza. And it became very, very touchy for the Crown Prince to defend its position to renormalize with Israel. This issue is now quite sidelined. So I think that for sure the most ancient contemporary conflict, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the international relations, will continue to shape regional and global security politics, even though the so-called international community was no more focused on that issue. Thus, I think that the new regional middle powers, such as Saudi Arabia, but even also helped by UAE and Qatar, helped or challenged, because they have not the same line to defend the issue. So, of course, their financial powerful weight will have a major role and responsibility in the regional game. In the same line, Israel is gaining a major influence in the region, in reconfiguring the region. So, finally, the Abraham Accords and the Israeli-Saudi rapprochement have largely contributed to the removal of the Palestinian political issue. So, we are in a position, these Arab Gulf states are in a very forefront position for this issue.
Thank you, Dr. Dazi-Heni. Dr. Samaan, I'll turn to you again, because what you mentioned is really interesting about the youth playing a massive role in society as well. It's the case as well, Dr. Samaan, in Israel, where the youth are asking for the return of hostages, a ceasefire for a few weeks. From a security perspective, what are the obstacles that could prevent effective reconstruction efforts in Gaza? As we know now, you mentioned that Hamas, Israel wants to end Hamas completely before engaging in any efforts of reconstruction. But the US has put it on the table. So what do you think could prevent, really, or push Netanyahu to come to this conclusion as well?
Well, to be frank, there are a lot of things that today, I don't think we can truly discuss, let's say, a two-state solution, or even just like transition of power in Gaza at the moment, not for the coming months. We saw that the Arab League came up with a plan, but that was mostly because there was pressure from the Trump administration to do something, and the plan was dismissed right away. There are several reasons, and I agreed with what Fatiha said about the reluctance from Gulf states. I would say that there's a mix of the population, and I don't think that Gulf leaders at the moment, especially those that may not feel confident about their own stability, would like to display support to Israel and to be seen as complicit with the war in Gaza, which is for a lot of the Arab population seen as the biggest atrocity since 1948. We may argue about that, but that's the perception. In addition to that, there's also a very cold, hard reality, which is that even countries like the UAE or Saudi Arabia, which might be open to the idea of economic investments and security cooperation on Gaza, Well, the problem is that they don't have any guarantees from the Israelis that the Israelis would accept, and when I say Israelis, I mean this government, that this Israeli government would accept any type of Palestinian transition. We don't see the Palestinian Authority being acceptable for the Israeli government, and there is no other alternative. There was the idea of having tribes. If you remember, the Israeli government came up with the idea of using Palestinian tribes inside Gaza until those tribesmen, the leaders of those tribes, were killed by Hamas the moment they were mentioned. So on top of that, there's also the fact that Gulf states, Gulf leaders do not trust the Palestinian leaders themselves. So you have, I mean, again, all the different obstacles are not new. But on top of that, I honestly doubt that the Trump administration has any desire beyond managing and containing the Gaza conflict. I don't think they want to get invested on this topic. And we will probably discuss the Trump effect on the Middle East, but I wouldn't expect like a long-term plan of this administration on Gaza beyond what we've seen so far, which is mostly that there was a lot of pressure raising some strange plans about the Gaza Riviera, but at the end of the day, they are not changing the facts with regards to the Israeli strategy on Gaza. So again, a lot of obstacles. I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I just want us not to have any misleading discussion on how could we reconstruct Gaza. Honestly, as of now, I think as long as you have Hamas, which is still around, I don't see how this can happen.
Thank you, Dr. Samaan. We'll turn to the second topic of our discussion with Hamas support and the support of Iran in these proxies around the Middle East, as well as Iran's regional influence is under serious strain. Economic challenges, domestic unrest, setbacks for its regional proxies. What does this mean for regional security and political alliances as well? First, I'll come back to you, Dr. Samaan. With Iran's proxies weakened, we saw it with Hezbollah in Lebanon, we saw it with the Houthis in Yemen. How does this shift the strategic balance in the region, and especially the role of Iran on the international scene?
Thank you. I mean, first, I would say that for sure we see Hamas and Hezbollah being severely weakened, but I wouldn't put the Houthis in that same category, because what we've seen over the last month, over the last year, is that the Houthis have been able quite successfully to attack ships, to disrupt maritime trade in the Red Sea, and this, for the U.S. Navy, this has been one of the biggest challenges, honestly, over the past decades. So the Houthis are not in the same category, I would say, but for sure we saw that Iran's proxy strategy has been rendered irrelevant, or at least it needs to be revised, because Iran had used those relations as basically some kind of a second strike capabilities vis-a-vis Israel or the US. Basically, that if Israel or the US was to attack Iran, they could rely on Hezbollah, they could rely on Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. This is no longer really a convincing scenario. But having said that, I think we shouldn't dismiss what the Iranian regime is doing at the moment, for instance, with its relationship with Russia. Maybe we'll come back to that later. But Iran is not completely isolated. Iran just organized with Russia and China naval drills in the Gulf of Oman. So I don't think this is sending a message of Iran completely out of the equation. So for sure, at the moment, they don't have the same power through the proxies that they had, and in particular, I'd say in Gaza or in Lebanon and Syria, but there are other areas in Yemen or in its cooperation with Russia where Iran is still around and will, I would say, keep a strong influence in the, let's say, the regional competition.
It's very interesting what you said, and I'll come to you, Mr. Belbaji. Reshaping the alliances on the international scenes. We've seen that Saudi Arabia and the UAE have engaged in Iran in different ways, let's say it. So Dr. Samaan said that with new alliances on the table, with Russia, for example, Iran is not totally isolated. But do you think that Tehran could become further isolated with a diplomatic reset from the Gulf country region?
That's very interesting. Just on the points that the two professors raised, Prince Mohammed bin Salman did a survey of opinion in Saudi Arabia vis-a-vis normalization, and he was surprised that 87% of Saudis were against normalization. So he asked them to do the survey again, and it came back with 93% of Saudis against normalization. So operating in this context, his hands are also tied. And in countries like that, you'd be surprised that one of the most functional elements of the state, of a security state, is its ability to take public opinion. Now, the added value, which the academics will tell you, is that in a security state, people say what they think they want the government to say in a survey. They don't say the survey honestly. So the Saudi people think that their government doesn't want to normalize. So those are two takeaways. On re-establishing the diplomatic balance in the region, that's very interesting. At the moment, Iran and the US are speaking in Oman, in the Sultanate of Oman, which most people don't know. These are part of negotiations that have been taking place in the background. I think neither the Trump administration nor Iran would want a conflict. You would have seen the Qatari foreign minister last week on a podcast with Tucker Carlson saying that a strike on Iran would affect Gulf water security. Gulf water is desalinated from the sea, and a strike on Iranian nuclear facilities would make the Gulf water radioactive and create a huge ecological and demographic disaster. So nobody wants that. In terms of Iran being checkmated, I don't think Iran will give up the strategic ground that it has built over the last 20 years. I think it's incorrect in the West to see Iran as a dominating power. Iran is a disruptive power. Its idea is to enter a vacuum or a field of conflict where it can have strategic advantage. It's not there to, govern 240 million Arab people. That's an impossibility. So I don't think it will lose the ground that it's built. In Lebanon, last month, Hezbollah raised $500 million for the reconstruction of homes in southern Lebanon. If Iran was out of the game and Hezbollah had lost its strategic advantage, there's no way that they could have raised $500 million for reconstruction. That's a remarkable fundraising effort. Will they be left out of the region? I think with the ceasefire talks, with what Qatar has done with the war in Gaza, you cannot have these discussions without Iran. Every time aggressive or worrying noises come out of the Trump administration, you see the Iranian foreign minister in Riyadh. So the fact that they've built this relationship with the Gulf states has allowed them to be part of the negotiations while also lobby for themselves against a strike from the US or US plus Israel.
I'll just like to ask a question about what you said about Hezbollah, meaning that destroying the main leaders of the entity doesn't necessarily cut ties between different alliances like Iran and Hezbollah that doesn't have Nasrallah anymore, but is still on the international scene, is still leading the way in Lebanon.
I mean, I completely agree. There are military people in the room, as in it's great to remove and decapitate a regime or a movement, but 80 years since, we're still talking about Nazis in Europe, as in it really doesn't change anything. These are ideological initiatives with followings that really work very well in a vacuum, and whether it's Syria or Lebanon or anywhere where the state is weak, it's an incredible opportunity for a country like Iran to fill that vacuum.
Professor Dazi-Heni, I'll come to you on Iran's declining, or not, depending on your opinion, How do you see that affecting different internal Gulf politics?
Yes, definitely. Iran is weakened regionally, for sure. And it's an opportunity, of course, especially for Saudi Arabia to have leverage on other files in the region, especially, for instance, in Syria, with the toppling of Assad regime. Even though Saudi Arabia reintegrated Assad regime, sorry, in 2023, for them, the fact that Iran is excluded from Syria is a major gain, for sure. Even though this new Islamist power is seen with a lot of, how to say, prudence, I don't know, skepticism, the Saudis were the first to be visited by Ahmed Shara, the new Syrian president by interim. So definitely it's a leverage for Saudi Arabia. But I want to add, in line with what Zaid said, that the reconfiguration of the Middle East is totally at the opposite of the first mandate, Trump first mandate. And we've seen that the Gulf leaders are extremely keen to appease the situation with Iran. They absolutely want to avoid a military confrontation between Israel and Iran. And they are very surprised by the fact that the European countries are very maximalist in the rhetoric, such as containing absolutely Iran. And for Gulf, I attended a lot of conferences in Berlin and in Visio, etc., with Gulf think tanks, and they are very surprised by this European maximalist narrative, because they generally rely on EU to re-equilibrate and have a constructive discussion on the security and on the Iranian file. And they are very afraid of the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu, that is surfing on its military successes in the Middle East, because he estimates that he's at the forefront of the fact that the Assad regime has toppled, which is partly true, and he has weakened the axis of resistance. So they are very afraid that he will continue this very aggressive rhetoric, because his objective is, he said, that it's to topple the Iranian regime. And this is a nightmare for the Gulf leaders, not because they have intimacy with the Islamic Republic, but for them regime change is the worst nightmare, because we've seen how they reacted with Mubarak. So chaos is worse than a weakened Islamic Republic. So for them, they want absolutely to avoid this maximalist scenario. And the main objective of Gulf leaders today, more than Gaza, as Jean-Loup said, is to convince the Trump administration to avoid such a scenario.
Just on that, Margot, the only reason why we're talking about Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE is because Egypt, Syria, and Iraq were removed from Arab leadership. This is a vacuum. We have tiny countries the size of Ile-de-France managing serious foreign policy outcomes, and not with the population of Ile-de-France, with the population of Paris 7.
No, but Saudi Arabia is a little bit bigger.
No, but in the context of the regional leadership, that 40 years ago, 50 years ago, without Iraq and Syria and Egypt, that's why we're in this situation, and that's because of what the professor said with regards to regime change. We've been left with these hollow formerly very important Arabic countries.
We'll talk about that in a second as well. But I want to deep dive into Trump's mind, if we can, with this second term and his foreign policy. He definitely said that he was interested in coming back to a nuclear deal with Iran. Let's see if it's true or not. We'll see in the future. But President Trump, back in the White House, and his policies of the Middle East are already taking shape, as we said. His previous term was marked with the Abraham Accords that we spoke about, and maximum pressure on Iran, and strong support for Israel as well, which is changing the dynamics in the last few months. Dr. Samaan, I'll come back to you. You're still in Singapore. Trump has always emphasized military power over diplomacy. What shift in U.S. defense policy should the region expect?
Well, and first, I would say that Trump, based on his first term, likes to the display of force, the demonstration of force, but he's not really. Is actually quite reluctant when it comes to the use of force. By the way, you could argue that the shift from Gulf states towards Iran, the movement of de-escalation between Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran, that was one consequence of Trump not doing much on the attack on the Aramco station, if you remember, back in 2019. So first, I wouldn't say that Trump is really, I'd say, trigger happy, is very reluctant when it comes to the use of force. But having said that, when it comes to your question on the defense priorities, if we look at the people that are joining and that are being approved by Congress this administration, clearly the priority is not the Middle East, it's not Europe, clearly, but it's China. And even in that case, it's very difficult to assess if this Trump administration would go to war with China on Taiwan, or would actually just find a good deal with China at the expense of Taiwan. So having said that, that means the Middle East is definitely going to be a secondary issue. That may lead to a reduction of forces. But that also leads to, I'd say, inconsistencies at the diplomatic level. Right now, after months of tough talks on Iran, we see a Donald Trump which is more open to the idea of negotiations with Iran. It's very difficult, like on any diplomatic file, to know what it means in terms of the content of that negotiation. Are we considering going back to something that would be similar to the nuclear deal of the past decade, or is it maybe something which would be quite worrisome for the region, a North Korean scenario where Trump just accepts the Iranian nuclear ambitions and that's it? Again, there's only one thing for sure based on the first term, which is inconsistencies. He may shift from one topic to another. He may say something on Iran and then suddenly implements maximum pressure like he did during the first term. But the only thing I know for sure from my discussions with people in DC is that the Middle East is not their priority. The only way they look at the Middle East right now is through the lens of the competition with China. Maybe we'll go back to that later, but I think this is what is coming for Israel and the Gulf states. The other countries like Jordan, Egypt, I don't want to launch another discussion like Zaid just pointed out, but seen from Washington, those are irrelevant countries. These are failed states or poor states. That doesn't matter for the Trump administration. What matters is Israel and the Gulf states, and the Trump administration hates the fact that, especially for the Gulf states, they have more and more cooperation in military, economic, and diplomatic sectors with China. So I think that might be one of the few elements that will be at the top of the agenda in the coming years for the Trump relations with the Middle East.
Thank you, Dr. Samaan. I'll push you a little bit with my next question with Zaid Belbaji, because Dr. Samaan just said that the Middle East is not necessarily a priority, but at the same time, Donald Trump said, I want a hostage deal before my inauguration. So in the same sense that his speeches are pretty much different from what his defense policy might be. Regarding the Gulf countries, we know that Saudi Arabia, for example, regarding the Abraham Accords, said if there's no Palestinian state, we're not going to build Abraham Accords with Israel. There's not going to be any normalization. Do you think that if Trump imposed a ceasefire on the long run, that would be enough for a country like Saudi Arabia to come to a normalization with Israel? Regarding other countries, Arab countries, I know I have some experts on set sometimes that say what Trump wants is to expand Abraham Accords within the Arab world, even maybe with Syria at some point, to create normalization with Israel, and he's willing to push forward with anything to get to that point. What do you think?
It's a good question. I think normalization will not be on the table just with a ceasefire. The Saudi condition is a coherent Palestinian state, and I don't think there's going to be any budging on that. Some people say that pledge only lasts King Salman's lifetime and that Prince Mohammed has different ideas. But in any case, I think it's to do with the Palestinian state. Separately, normalization has economic ties and a link to the defense pact or agreement that Riyadh wants with Washington. Now, that defense agreement or pact is also based on economy. The Saudi economy is not doing very well, and they will push this question down the line until they're in a situation to buy heavily and to buy American heavily. They pledged $600 billion to the previous Trump administration, of which maybe an eighth has been realized. And the Trump administration will want to make sure that before they give anything, that there are serious commitments from Saudi Arabia to buy American. So that's one. In terms of the Trump administration's interest in the region, as Professor Samaan said and you alluded to, I think the president has a very outdated view of the region. I think he sees, for example, countries like Saudi Arabia as being very wealthy, which at the moment they are not. I think he thinks that he'll be able to put plans across very quickly, and the reality on the ground is much harder. The Saudis wanted Trump and Putin to visit on the 27th and 28th of February, but very quickly all sides realized that this kind of thing doesn't happen that quickly. So I think the Trump administration will very soon realize that things are easier said than done. There are also discussions now within the White House that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, could present his resignation at any time. So if Trump's having these
He already changed his stance on Ukraine recently.
Okay. Well, if there are issues in the Trump camp already, I think doing deals is going to be much harder. And with Saudi Arabia, it's to do with the defense pact, which has economic implications, which Saudi Arabia is in no position to pay for at the moment, and the establishment of a Palestinian state. I asked the Israeli foreign minister in Munich if Israel was big enough, and he told me, no, it's not, which is a whole different set of geopolitical challenges if Israeli decision makers across the board say that Israel is too small. There are problems down the line.
We've seen a lot of new leaders coming into the international scene with new countries such as Turkey, such as Saudi Arabia, hosting massive diplomatic discussions, as recently in Jeddah and in Riyadh with Ukraine and Russia, for example. Dr. Dazi-Heni, I'll come to you on that, because what we want to know is how Trump's policies will affect Gulf monarchies. Do you think that they will align closely with Washington, as Zaid Belbaji just said, regarding the defense coalition that they have? Or do you think they will seek for greater independence because they have this power on the international scene as well? And they can see that they can be a middle ground between two powerful countries if there is any geopolitical discussion coming forward.
In fact, the main concern of GCC states, and in particular Saudi Arabia, with this Trump II administration, are on economic constraints. Definitely, Trump wants to have a very low oil price. And as Zaid said, Saudi Arabia is in high stress for complying with all its mega projects from Vision 2030. And so Saudi Arabia needs a relatively high oil price, because even if we are always listening about diversification, economic diversification, blah, 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 it remains heavily relying on oil price, all the economy of Saudi Arabia. So I think this is the main issue for Saudi Arabia with this Trump II administration. This is, as I said, a high stress for the Saudi leadership, whose country is surrounded by regional wars. Yemen is frozen, but the conflict is not ended. You have a Syria which is not yet stable. You have Sudan that is becoming a powder keg. And we have all the impacts of this Sudan conflict on the Horn of Africa. And we have the militarization of the Red Sea. And in the meantime, all the mega projects of Saudi Arabia are concentrated on the shore of the Red Sea, all along. You can see the map. It's the main preoccupation for Saudi Arabia. It's like Trump. It's Saudi first. Saudi national. They have exactly the same narrative, but they are divergent in that there are a lot of economic and conflict of interest. And for me, this is the main concern for the Saudis, much more than the very complicated regional issues, because they think that they can always deal with Trump. They can deal nation between nation and privately, because the real estate mega Trump empire have a lot to do with secret deals with the different Saudi leaders, UAE leaders, etc. So all this is very, very interconnected. But I think that they will. They will play on multipolarity much more than aligning blindly on US. I think that they will continue to play this multipolar game, definitely.
That's very interesting, especially that there is another topic that I want to bring on the table, which is Syria, which has been quite of the surprise of this year, I might say, with the Assad regime that has fallen and al-Shara taking power there. So there has been serious allegations recently regarding al-Shara, and we'll speak more broadly about this. And Syria, let's say, remains a battleground for regional and international interests. The question is what happens next, because we know that a lot of powerful countries were very interested in Syria and in the region. I'll turn to you, Dr. Samaan. With Iran's influence quite weakening there and Russia focused on Ukraine, although they said that they wanted to keep their bases there, so we can talk broadly about that. How will Syria's military dynamics evolve under the new leadership of al-Shara, according to you?
Well, I think the first the first big question is, or the first two big questions, I'd say, at the domestic level in Syria are: is al-Sharaa able to control the territory? That's a simple question. Is he able to have the monopoly of violence within the borders of what we recognize to be Syria? And the second question is he, at the political level, is he able to open the process to other factions beyond his own group, so Tahrir al-Sham? On those two questions, my answer would be no. What we've seen over the last week is no matter how you look at the events where you have about more than 1,000 of civilians that got killed, even if you still want to hope that this government can do something, it means that this government is not able to crack down on the most extremist factions on the territory, and it's not able yet to launch a reconciliation process. So that's quite worrisome. And in addition to that, if you look at this new power, this transitional government, all the positions have been basically filled by people close to al-Sharaa, and in particular, if you look at the numbers, it's I think about 20 or maybe 17 out of 22 or 23 ministries which are controlled by HTS, and obviously the most important ones by HTS. So I'd say that at the moment that's the biggest unknown, how this will play out. And that leads to the question of external interference. The two biggest players right now are Turkey and Israel. Turkey, that's no surprise, and Turkey has been, I'd say, quite low-key on that. But Israel, that has been a lot in the reports, because Israel has expanded its control over the Golan Heights and has also intensified its airstrikes inside Syria. I think there's a mix of justifications from the Israeli standpoint. There's the idea that we don't know what's happening in Damascus, nobody's in charge. We cannot trust a group which is originally Al-Qaeda affiliated to be the one securing the border, or let's say the buffer zone. But in addition to that, I think Zaid pointed out, there's also the question of does that leave an opportunity for the Israeli government, and in particular for the far right, to justify some expansionism. There's a joke in the Middle East that when Israel wants to implement a buffer zone, there's no limits. The buffer zone can go as far as Paris because that's always going to justify the security concerns. So that's the big concern. And on top of that, we have, I'd say, the uncertainties related to the U.S. role in Syria, both in terms of economic sanctions. Nothing can happen inside Syria if the U.S. does not lift the economic sanctions. None of the Gulf states is going to invest in Syria if the U.S. administration does not lift those sanctions. Right now, we have a waiver which was put in place by the Biden administration for 6 months. Honestly, I don't see this Trump administration fighting for the lifting of those sanctions. And there's also an uncertainty regarding the U.S. security role. Trump said that he wanted the U.S. forces, which represent about 2,000 troops right now inside Syria, mostly involved in counter-terrorism against the Islamic State. He wants them out. That's actually not something new. He actually asked that during the first term and then forgot about it later on. But those uncertainties regarding the U.S., that also exacerbates, I'd say, the security conundrum inside Syria.
Thank you, Dr. Samaan. You mentioned something very interesting and powerful about the fact that al-Sharaa, formerly named al-Jaluni, was a leader of the al-Nusra Front, and that is very difficult for Gulf countries and Gulf states to re-engage with Damascus in a way. Zaid Balbaji, I'll come to you because these discussions are going to be key in the future regarding Syria. Do you think they will take a stronger role in shaping Syria's post-Assad future, maybe through the way of Turkey that has been leading the way in the last weeks, for example, to re-engage a dialogue, to give the idea of a Sunni-type Gulf country model, I would say, in Syria? Do you think they have a role to play in there?
I'll answer your question through the prism of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE. For Saudi Arabia, the Syria policy is about keeping Turkey out of Syria. Saudi Arabia's Syria policy has been formulated by a concern that Turkey will encroach further and further into the region as the US withdraws and manage or occupy or peacekeep under the guise of NATO. As you know, Turkey has the second largest military within NATO, and that way establish its writ across the region. That's Saudi Arabia. For Qatar, Syria has been an incredible success. One decision maker told me at the time in December that Qatar's work in changing the regime in Syria is akin to Monaco changing the regime in France or in Spain. As in, you really can't understate how pivotal and a successful effort this was for a very small country. For Abu Dhabi, it's about countering Qatar. What Qatar did in Syria has terrified Abu Dhabi, and Abu Dhabi is now worried about that happening in Egypt. It's now supporting Sisi quite strongly. Some people say that it might encourage a change in regime in Egypt that Abu Dhabi organizes and state manages before Sisi himself is changed. And then for Bahrain, I find this very fascinating because even though Bahrain's a tiny country, the second visit to Ahmed al-Shara was from the head of Bahraini intelligence. Now, you can wonder why that was the case. It's most likely because Bahrain had a disproportionate number of ISIS members as a small country, or it could be because it was there on Abu Dhabi's bidding. But I think the four of them having this interest in Syria is very interesting. However, I think Qatar is most likely to do very well because this is about finances. Syria needs a huge amount of money to rebuild, and that's money that Saudi Arabia simply is not going to offer the Syrian government.
Very interesting. Professor Dazi-Heni, does this leadership change create an opening for greater Gulf involvement in Syria's reconstruction and governments, you think?
Well, I will nuance a little bit what Zaid said on Saudi Arabia, willing to see Turkey completely out of the game in Syria. For sure, they don't want to see Turkey replacing Iran in Syria, for sure. But I think that the Saudis are quite well managing a consultation with Turkey, and they have quite strong relations also with this Shara government. Even, of course, they are very skeptical about this ex-jihadist leader. But I think that they are playing like re-equilibrating power in Syria, and they are not openly confronting the presence of Turkey. I think that there are a lot of consultation between Erdogan and the Crown Prince. For sure, for UAE, it's a major setback. They are extremely fearful of the new Islamist power in Syria, and Cairo, also Egypt, is one of the most fearful of the situation. So it's quite difficult to encompass and envisage regional rebuilding around this situation. But as Jean-Loup said, I think that the major issue is what Trump too will do on Syria. Because we know that the Middle East is not the main preoccupation of this administration, for sure.
In terms of what, keeping bases there?
Yes, and
US bases?
having a say in what would occur in Syria, because apparently the new link between Shara and the Kurds have been facilitated by the US. So I don't see a total withdrawal of US from this equation, because it's very uncertain, and the issue in Syria is one of the most unstable.
We have a time constraint, so I will move
Yes.
forward to the next topic because, as you know, we'll open to question in a few minutes before Fatiha can leave for Lille. And so if you have questions, ask Fatiha first because she needs to leave at 12:10, and then you can ask Zaid Belbaji and Jean-Loup Samaan questions afterwards. In a few seconds, we'll move to this next topic for 4 minutes, and then we'll open to questions. So I want to go onto the topic of extra-regional actors such as Europe, India, China, that are not, the U.S. or Russia interfering into the policies in the Middle East. So I'll come to you first, Dr. Samaan, about China's role, for example, that has deepened its economic partnerships across the Gulf and even brokered talks with Iran and Saudi Arabia. How do you think and how sustainable it is for China's growing role in the Middle East?
Well, right now it's pretty sustainable because the Chinese have no intention to replace the Americans, at least in terms of the strategy. They do not contemplate any military presence in the Middle East the same way we've seen with the US or with the Europeans as well over the last decades. The main message of China towards the Middle East is we want to make economic investments, we want to invest in your infrastructures, in your digital networks and so on, in your ports. But we're not going to provide security guarantees. And actually, that's something that the Middle East likes, because that relates to what we just talked about regarding the frustration of Middle Eastern countries regarding the US in the region. So more and more you hear not just, I'd say, Gulf population, but also the decision makers saying that at least China is a more reliable partner. It may not provide the same security guarantees of the US, but at least it doesn't lie about those guarantees, because there is the perception that even though the US will say we provide those security guarantees, what can happen is what happened to Mubarak, that was mentioned earlier, the former president of Egypt, who was abandoned by the Obama administration after 2 weeks of demonstrations. So that's the perception. So at the moment it's sustainable. The key, I think, will be how Gulf states, because those are the countries that have the most invested on their relations with China, how Gulf states adapt or react to the pressure that is surely coming from the Trump administration. The case of the UAE is maybe the most interesting for us here. The UAE, for instance, invested and is investing a lot in artificial intelligence. We've seen that in France, obviously, but in the US, there has been a big partnership between one entity controlled by Abu Dhabi, G42, and Microsoft. And this is very closely monitored by Congress. And there's a lot of disputes in DC regarding if this is the right way, because there are still suspicions about what the UAE and China do in artificial intelligence, but also in the military domain. So it's sustainable as long as Gulf states can play this non-alignment or multi-alignment strategy that they so far like to cultivate. But there will be a lot of pressure for sure in coming years from the Trump administration.
Thank you, Dr. Samaan. Zaid, another key player is India, that has significantly strengthened ties with the Gulf, especially in trade and security. They tried to play a significant role on Russia and Ukraine, for example. They quite failed on that. We can say it quite clearly. Could it become a major regional power player, according to you?
I think most definitely. Almost 40% of India's energy imports come from the Gulf. Half the population of Bahrain is Indian. There are almost 9 million Indians living in the Gulf, most definitely. That's why Sheikh Tamim's visit to Modi was taken so seriously. On what Professor Samaan said, the only reason why Congress is looking at the collaboration between G42 and Microsoft so closely is because G42 was working with China. So we're constantly going to see this. And in the same way that he said that China is a more reliable ally than the US is, once upon a time the US was a more reliable ally than the UK. So these untested countries like India and China will soon start making their own demands once the relationships become more mature. But I do think India, given its proximity, its relevance to security, to the Gulf, internal demographics, is going to become more important, definitely.
Dr. Dazi-Heni, I'll come to you and then we'll open to question in 1 minute. But I would like to ask you a key question about Europe, because Europe has mainly struggled to maintain an active role in Middle Eastern diplomacy, leaving it to other countries, and especially the US, for example. Do you think that the EU still have a meaningful influence in the region? You spoke about the maximalist vision that they had regarding Iran. Does that has an impact on what they can say or not in the region as well?
First, I want to say that EU is seen as a non-relevant security partner in the Gulf because of its weakness and inability to have a strong common foreign and defense policy in its own environment.
You're not going to make a lot of people happy in the room.
No, but I will. This is my first point, but I will nuance secondly. And we can see it with Ukraine. And also in the Mediterranean Sea with Libya. And this is due also to the domestic issues related with growing powerful far-right parties that antagonize population in Europe in focusing mainly their foreign attention on migration and Islam issues, instead of focusing on development and prosperity dynamics with Africa or Middle East like Asian powers do. So this is the first point. But true, Europe, more broadly than EU, because UK is extremely important as a major actor, is definitely still a major partner. So I nuance, especially in the context of this very disruptive US administration. So even though EU is now mainly involved in rethinking its efforts to build a stronger independent defense and strategic autonomy, this echoes strongly for Arab Gulf monarchies that expect very much to reach this kind of strategic autonomy. So indeed, this momentum could play in favor to EU, as we began to see with the EU-GCC energy and new geopolitical partnership elaborated since last May 2022, after the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So, of course, GCC states are expecting a lot from EU since a long time. But they still don't see EU playing a major role in securing defense cooperation.
Margot, just on that point, I would agree everything on the EU not having a coherent policy. However, one of the few successes of French diplomacy in the last 5 or 6 years has been in the Arab world. France hasn't replaced the influence it had in Northwest Africa, but it's definitely done an incredible job in the Arab world. The president is on WhatsApp terms with the heads of state. France is selling equipment to these countries. The president goes there himself. He understands the personal nature. In a way, when you have a highly personalized presidency, it can be a double-edged sword. It can make personal relationships difficult or very good.
Yes, but France is not EU.
No, that's what I'm saying. But within the EU, the success story is France. And in a vacuum of there being 5 prime ministers in 4 years in the United Kingdom, France, I think, is that I'm really I keep asking the people at the Elysee and the French Foreign Ministry because I want to see them because they're doing incredible policy, especially in the Gulf states and Lebanon and Syria.
I will tell you that